If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is Bruce McGuire, and you are listening to the Mothman series, the most definitive and comprehensive podcast on the Mothman cryptid. Myth, legend, or real beast is what we are covering, as well as the plethora of other paranormal, UFO, Men in Black activity that occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in the 13 months surrounding the 1967 Silver Bridge collapse. This is Part 8, Premonitions and Precognition. Now, it's been long reported that certain residents of the Point Pleasant area had premonitions about the collapse of the Silver Bridge. Most of them have not gone public, and there are very few specific accounts, but apparently more than one individual had either frightening dreams or bizarre flashing images or just a sense of foreboding that kind of seemed to emanate from the town itself in that area, not just and many people's perception of that. Now, depending what you believe the Mothman is, would dictate how you interpret some of this information. So we'll be diving deep, including, as always, talking about various factors that no one else seems to talk about. But that's what the MINDSHOCK podcast is for. If you like the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. And make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button if you like the podcast. Feel free to share it across social media platforms. We are also on Anchor. If you want to just listen to the podcast and you don't need the accompanying imagery and videos on the YouTube channel, you could also like our Facebook page, and you could check us out Twitter, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority in requesting topics or true crime cases to be covered on the podcast. Any questions, comments, thoughts, theories, leave them in the comments section. So let's get into it. Obviously, the Mothman was popularized by the Mothman prophecies, the 2002 film directed by Mark Pellington starring Richard Gere. But one thing, the film, if you haven't seen the film, definitely check it out. It is a very atmospheric horror movie, and what it really captured well was that sense of dread just permeating everything, anything and everything in the Point Pleasant area. Now, what a lot of people don't know is John Keel himself, the author of the Mothman Prophecies, the 1975 book about the account, which also goes into all of this other strange activity, which makes the Mothman creature itself probably the least fascinating aspect of this whole case. Now, a lot of people don't know that. They just quickly, so-called skeptics, just quickly look at this Mothman case and say, oh, it's probably a big owl, completely discounting everything as mass hysteria, as if all of these all of these longtime residents can't tell the difference between an owl and any other creature, and none of this, and pretending all this other bizarre activity with Men in Black and vehicles, strange phone calls. You did one of the biggest UFO waves ever recorded. I mean, they pretend none of that happens. I mean, it takes a strong kind of cognitive dissonance to write off all of these other factors, the Mothman of which is probably even the least mysterious when you look at all of this case as a whole, neutrally, objectively, scientifically, and logically, without taking any sides. Some people are afraid to do that. They are simply afraid to live in a world where there are unexplained phenomena. And of course, the unexplained, the paranormal, the supernatural, is simply tomorrow's science. When there is an explanation, then it will no longer be a mystery. But for the time being, it has not been completely explained, but we are attempting to do so here on MINDSHOCK, and so John Keel himself had a premonition. Now, what's strange is this isn't talked about. Now, on johnkeel.com, you can actually find the original correspondence letters and typed up papers from John Keel to various individuals, organizations, and anything and everything that has to do with his research. So this includes the Mothman case as well as many other cases. Now, what I found buried in this archive is one of his letters to Mary Hyre, of course, the famous journalist who first brought the Mothman story to the public eye. And this is a journalist and news reporter who has never covered anything else controversial. Nothing paranormal, nothing related to UFOs or strange creatures. And she was, of course, a witness to some activity herself. If you haven't checked out the first 7 episodes of the Mothman podcast, please do so. They are riveting, fascinating, and cover every aspect of the case and are a good prerequisite before we dive deep into these correspondence letters. So they corresponded back and forth as Keel was in New York as well as researching in other areas and coming out to West Virginia here and there to research this case. So this is one letter in full. This was typed November 3rd, 1967. Dear Mary, thanks for your letter. It is hardly a secret that I am extremely concerned with what has been happening in Point Pleasant, and I often feel very helpless in the midst of these rapidly developing situations. So much is going on everywhere now, and so very little of it is being reported in the general press. Sometimes I despair and fear that I am fighting a one-man battle against time and some monstrous unknown group. I believe that UFO bases have been directly established somewhere in the Ohio Valley. I further believe that more and more UFO people are being brought in to man those bases and prepare for a military-like buildup. In the meantime, these people, in quotations, I'm assuming he's either referencing extraterrestrials, men in black, or interdimensional entities of some sort, possibly ultra-terrestrials, his label for them. But here he's calling them people, in quotations, are engaged in a complicated program to keep everyone confused. Now, that's quite interesting because he has referenced fairy-like entities, which I've gone over in the previous podcasts, where they kind of manipulate the observer using information in the observer's own mind or the experiencer of any said paranormal activity, whether it be UFO or otherwise. And he's one of the first paranormal researchers who theorized this possible explanation for the paranormal. And so here in this letter, he's basically saying that it's almost like a disinfo campaign or some kind of obfuscation, intentional confusion and obfuscation being unleashed upon the manipulated people of this area so that they don't know what's going on. And this can lead to yet another theory, if we're just going down the gauntlet of possible theories. If this West Virginia, Point Pleasant area and the Mothman, there were Bigfoot sightings in the area, which I've gone over in the first episodes, UFO activity, Men in Black. If this is all some kind of weird, bizarre experiment, possibly also factoring other supernatural phenomena or not, by the government or some other group, would that explain all of this activity? Because there's far too much to write off. But back to the letter, these people are engaged in a complicated program to keep everyone confused. They contacted Derenberger and probably many others to spread word that they are peaceful, etc., and to mislead the believers into thinking that this is all a harmless operation. The, quote, monsters, which have been appearing in West Virginia and many other places, are probably meant to add to the confusion and distract reporters the Air Force, etc., as well as to make the situation seem ridiculous to outsiders and skeptics. These monsters are probably operations of the UFO people and are carrying out weird missions in the Point Pleasant area, spreading fear, spying on specific individuals, etc. Mabel told me that Mrs. Thomas has been seeing many colored people in the TNT. So I'd better tell you a few things in the strictest confidence. Do not breathe a word of this to anyone. I could be mistaken, although I'm sure I'm not, and it would be senseless to start any kind of panic. Many of the UFO people are dark-skinned and look like Indians or Negroes. There are two types. One type wears black clothing and are dangerous. Another type wears gray clothing and they are friendlier and more reasonable. Another type wears a green coverall type of garment and has usually long silver white hair. Mrs. Bowen saw such a person. So did Mrs. Lily's daughter. There are still other types with pale complexions. They often have to wear thick lensed glasses. One of these probably visited you in your office a few months ago. And of course, I've gone over these in the Men in Black episode in the Mothman series. And I'm just also reading all of this. It makes it, if we're talking interdimensional or extraterrestrial, ultra-terrestrial visitors of some kind, would it be possible that if there was a so-called malevolent group, or let's say a group with unauthorized activity, would another separate ultra-terrestrial group, either a different race of ultra-terrestrials or extraterrestrials, or a different government in this alternate universe, would they, if this activity was frowned upon, are there multiple types that are unrelated to each other, all kind of keeping tabs on what's going on in the Point Pleasant area, or possibly trying to interfere with this experiment, if this is some kind of bizarre experiment on humans in the area? All things to ponder in this Mothman realm, where we have no clue what's going on, but we know that there's a whole bunch of different types of paranormal activity in the process. Be alert for stories about any of these, and be particularly alert for any increase in the dark-skinned people in your area. They may turn up wearing ordinary sports clothes. At first glance, you might mistake them as Negroes, but their facial characteristics are quite different. As if this isn't bad enough, there is still another type who have normal complexions and normal features, but usually they have blonde hair, sometimes crew cuts, and black or gray eyes. They are often tall, over 6 feet. They dress normally and drive ordinary cars. There are both men and women in all types. They may speak broken English, and they may have slight accents like East Indians from India. Many of them speak in biblical terms, thou, etc., and have apparently memorized the Bible and are able to quote freely from it. They sometimes convince the devout that they are angels or messengers from God. Alright, we have another big twist here. I did not go over this in the Men in Black episode, but there appears to be quite some more individuals, not just the Men in Black, that were out of place and contacting local residents of the descriptions that John Keel has outlined here, and it's all quite bizarre. But he's also saying another tidbit here that has never been released as far as I know, that some of these entities, human-like entities, or maybe they are humans, they've memorized the Bible, can quote freely from it, and use biblical, basically Old English type terms like thou or thee and things of that nature. Wow, what to do with that information? That is as if this whole Mothman case couldn't get even more bizarre. We now have this extra piece of information here Yes, it's tough to make sense of it, but the other thing that I just came up with now trying to connect these dots is if there is, let's say there was some kind of a portal or a nexus that enabled different creatures, possibly like the Mothman, or different ultra-terrestrials or interdimensional entities to move freely among Point Pleasant. So it's almost like a tourist attraction for different types of ultra-terrestrials. Where you have anyone and everyone, like, or what if they don't know they're from a different dimension either? I mean, this is so bizarre. If there's certain agents from either other governments or other Men in Black, if the Men in Black are an agency of the U.S. government. By the way, if you haven't checked out the MINDSHOCK episode on Men in Black encounters, so this is outside of the Mothman case, there are 2 episodes. Check those out. We go in depth on many Men in Black encounters and speculate upon who the Men in Black are and what they are doing. In many cases, people just believe that they want to silence UFO witnesses and things of that nature. But if this Point Pleasant nexus or portal was open for a brief period of time, would other government agencies want to kind of go see what was up? Is that why they speak broken English? Is that why some of them memorized the Bible because that's the only thing they had in their dimension that could be relevant to that area to communicate with humans? We really don't know. I mean, it could be any number of explanations. It's just another just bizarre piece of the puzzle here. I urge you to follow my example. Act interested and get people to talk about what they have seen, but do not try to give them any clues, or we might start a flood of rumors or worse, panic. Don't let people know that you have heard of these odd characters before. The best plan for you to follow is to write only about the UFOs, not about the people, in quotes. Play up an occasional monster story, however, since they, in quotations, probably expect these monsters to receive some publicity. If there is an open contact in your area and the witness comes to you freely with the story, I would appreciate if you check with me before printing the story. They, in quotations, might be trying to get more lies into circulation, or they might be setting up some kind of hoax. Things are terribly complicated now. So John Keel is telling Mary Hyre here that basically, I mean, some people think that he went completely paranoid, but it's kind of, if you were John Keel, and if these things happen to you, not just in Point Pleasant, but the other UFO activity, the strange phone calls, I mean, people were breaking into his apartment. I mean, there's no shortage of bizarreness that John Keel has experienced in his life as a result of being a paranormal researcher. So all of this is happening. This is what he's suspecting, that this is controlled in some way or another, and that there's all these different types of entities posing as humans that may or may not be human. So that'll set the stage. Now here we're getting into something critical. Here's the next point. Mary, I have good reasons for suspecting that may soon be a disaster in the Point Pleasant area which will not seem related to the UFO mystery. A plant along the river might either blow up or burn down. Possibly the Navy installation in Point Pleasant will be the center of such a disaster. A lot of people may be hurt. If this should happen, notify me as soon as you can and write the story normally. Don't even hint to anybody anything about this. Okay, so once again, he's typing this up November 3rd, 1967. The Silver Bridge disaster happened December 15th, 1967. So this is a little over a month prior. And obviously he got it wrong. It wasn't the plant, it was the bridge. But once again, I'm gonna read this line again. Mary, I have good reasons for suspecting that may soon be a disaster. I guess he forgot the word there. That there. maybe soon a disaster, in the Point Pleasant area, which will not seem to be related to the UFO mystery. And some people do think that the Silver Bridge collapse was a coincidence. So there was the Mothman, there was the Men in Black, there was all this crazy activity, and the Silver Bridge collapse was just one piece of the puzzle that was a coincidence. I've gone over this in true crime cases, usually, and how some detectives, they usually say in any case there's always one thing that doesn't make sense and can't be explained. It's not really related to solving the case. They can solve the case. There's just always one thing they can't quite figure out in the periphery. And so I've kind of, in researching a lot of paranormal cases, that seems to be true. It's almost like it's sort of a red herring, possibly not exactly a red herring. It's something that they never find the reason to, but it might not be related to solving the case. So this is also speculated, where if we take the Silver Bridge collapse out of the equation, what do we have? But I think writing it off completely is also not logical, because the Mothman is actually, in some mythologies, it's kind of a harbinger of doom. Some people believe it was witnessed before Chernobyl, the Chernobyl disaster. Other people have cited it in various other disasters. Obviously, this is not corroborated in any way. We're talking myth and legend. But the Angel of Death angle, or the Grim Reaper, these things are pervasive through history in mythology. So if it is related to a disaster, then yes, the connection is there. But if it's not, then it might be a red herring. But let's continue here. One of my major concerns in all of this is to protect the innocent people who become involved, and to keep them from becoming overly upset or frightened. We are now fighting for time, and if they realize that we suspect anything, they might be forced to speed up their plans, whatever those plans might be. The name Ralph Manchin does sound vaguely familiar now. He may have been one of the many persons I met at the convention. I don't think you need to worry about him. About the store owner, Mabel told me some things which lead me to suspect that he might be involved. Very much so. I suggest that you try to find out a little about him, but do so very carefully. Don't make him suspicious. He could be dangerous. Gray B has been behaving rather strangely ever since the convention. Be most careful in what you tell him. Discuss only the routine UFO sightings and run-of-the-mill monster sightings with him. But be friendly as usual, and don't let him know that I'm troubled about him. As for Dan D, I have told him many things and have tried to help him with his television project, but he is not a trained investigator and has been using the info I've given him to show off. He likes to act like an expert even though he doesn't really understand most of this. And what's worse, he has let a lot of things slip when he interviewed people. I've tried to impress upon him the need for a conservative, non-committal approach, but he is flying off in all directions and getting wrapped up in aspects of the mystery which he cannot possibly film or use on his program. Because he doesn't really know much about all of this except for what I've told him, he tends to have a meddling effect rather than helping me in what I'm struggling to accomplish. I respect him very much. He is both intelligent and sincere, but I'm worried about his meddling in cases like Henderson. About the only thing we can do at this point is to reassure people that the UFOs are apparently harmless, even though that might be a lie, and that nobody really knows what it is all about. Shortly after I returned from my last trip to Point Pleasant in May, I was directly contacted by one of the UFO groups and have been in almost daily touch since then. I am also constantly watched by more than one group. I have been given a great deal of information, some of it nonsense and some of it very valid. I have asked about you repeatedly and have been assured that you are in no danger. If anything unusual should happen to you, such as another encounter with the black cars, notify me immediately and I will take certain special steps to protect you. The same goes for all the others, Mabel, Park, Henderson, Connie, etc. In case of real trouble, I can probably get help to you very quickly, although of course I cannot guarantee it. Again, let me repeat, don't tell anyone about this letter or what is in it. I'm sure you can now understand some of my problems, etc. Perhaps you can place this in your safety deposit box or strong box for future reference. I hope I haven't shaken you up too much. There are weird and perhaps frightening days ahead for all of us, but I think that we will entangle all of this soon, and that my worst fears will never be realized. Take care of yourself, wear the gold cross all the time, and please keep in touch with me. I am leaving on another trip south next week and will be gone for about 2 weeks. If I can manage it, I will try to swing up into West Virginia on the way back. Best to everyone, John A. Keel. Okay, well, this is quite a troubling letter. He does not reveal the so-called good reasons for suspecting that may soon be a disaster in the Point Pleasant area. Okay, so that's the part of the letter that stands out. It is very, very bizarre. All right, so before we get into the details of the Silver Bridge collapse, I want to go over Mary Hyer's premonitions and dreams. So this is I just read the John Keel letter, and so now I'm going to reference the Mothman prophecies. So this is what John Keel writes in the Mothman prophecies, chapter 18, something awful is going to happen. I had flown to West Virginia after a trip to Atlanta and had a quick tour through the Carolinas investigating some UFO landings. Mary Hyre had picked me up at the Charleston airport, and as we drove to Point Pleasant, she told me about her own dreams. Just before I got your letter, she said, I had a terrible nightmare. There were a lot of people drowning in the river, and Christmas packages were floating everywhere in the river. Maybe you were just picking up my thoughts somehow, I suggested. Maybe, but I've covered a lot of drownings in that river, but never anything like this dream. There were so many people. I've been feeling uneasy ever since, and everybody else feels the same way. You can't really put your finger on it, but it's like something awful is about to happen. Perhaps it was only suggestion and an emotional hangover from all I had been going through, but when we reached Point Pleasant, I could feel a heavy atmosphere of foreboding. I wandered around the village under an oppressive cloud. One by one, old friends confided in me. You know, Keel, something is wrong here. I just don't know what. Ever since all that flying saucer business last spring, things just haven't seemed right. We don't get many UFO reports anymore, Mary told me, and except for the thing Mrs. Thomas saw, Mothman seems to be laying low. Everything is quiet. Too quiet. Toward midnight on November 19th, Mary and I were cruising through the TNT area. The sky was heavily overcast. It had been raining earlier and no stars were visible. The cloud ceiling was probably below 5,000 feet. Don't look now, Mary, I said lightly, but there's one of our friends straight ahead. A brilliant light was bouncing around in the blackened sky over a row of hills far to the east. Mary stopped the car and we watched it silently for about 10 minutes. It dropped down, then shot upward again. It slid from side to side, moving several degrees and then returning to its original position. Finally, Mary started her car again and drove slowly along a dirt road, hoping to find a better vantage point. We passed through the wooded section, and when we reached another clearing, the object was gone. You know what's interesting is people who simply just ignorantly write off every single UFO sighting or any kind of paranormal encounter, they would be inclined, without investigation, which is of course the height of ignorance, to just say, oh, well, they just saw a plane in the sky and it was a light. I mean, that's kind of silly. Now, not to discount the many, many UFO sightings, which are probably just planes, but in certain sightings, like this one, if it's to be believed, if the object is just dashing back and forth across the sky and then returning to its original position where it was floating, especially if we're talking 50 to 100 years ago, it's probably not a plane. Just a thought. Well, what do you think? She asked laconically. It definitely wasn't a star or a plane, I observed. It was so low somebody else was bound to have seen it. Let's wait and see if we get any reports. We didn't have to wait long. At 12:45 that morning, Mr. Albert Brown, a shift superintendent at a mine near Elmwood, West Virginia, was driving home from work when he too noticed an unusual light weaving around the sky. He stopped his car and watched. It seemed to turn colors, he told us later. First it was white, then blue, then orange. Then it looked like it was going down on top of a hill. Mr. Brown was northeast of the TNT area on Route 35, approximately 20 miles from our position in a straight line. After watching the object for a few minutes, he tried to find a road that might lead him into the hills where the object seemed to be playing. But he couldn't find such a road, so he simply parked and watched, enthralled. Finally, he went home and called the Civil Defense in Charleston. They told him to call the state police. A police car was sent to the area, but the thing was gone by the time they arrived. Who or what was on that remote hilltop, I wondered? Was some little cabin being bathed in an eerie light? Was some lonely person there, staring fixedly, paralyzed into the night? Keel goes on to outline some happenings in New York, strange and bizarre paranoia type things with different interviews, people knowing information they couldn't have known, possibly bugged phone calls, a lot of paranormal activity regarding to that. The other thing that was quite bizarre, when he returned to New York in December, he said this: I found that my entire stable of contactees was mourning my passing. So people have convinced them that he came to an untimely end in a mine cave-in. He also goes into other paranormal issues with a lot of contactees. He also goes into how he actually visited the New York telephone company and to verify that his line wasn't tapped. And keep in mind, this is in the 60s. But I'll be going into all of the bizarre phone activity in a later episode. So back to the book. A security officer for the Transit Authority and an old friend of mine, Joe Woodvine, happened to drop by my apartment late on the afternoon of the 15th, and he's talking about December 15th, 1967. I hadn't seen him in a long time, and he knew nothing about UFOs and my capers. I didn't mention the blackout until Dan Drazen dropped in. Joe listened in open-mouthed amazement as I explained to Dan that I expected the nation to blow a fuse the moment President Johnson pulled that switch. Dan was as far gone as I was. He glanced nervously at his watch and decided that if there was going to be a blackout, he preferred it to be in his own apartment. Joe became very silent, probably wondering if we were dangerous. Dan left at about 5 p.m. I switched on the television. At 5:45, the brief White House ceremony began. I broke out my candles and flashlights. Joe watched me worriedly. President Johnson delivered the customary little speech to the crowd on the White House lawn, reached for the switch. Arid, the Christmas tree blazed with light. The crowd oohed and awed as if they had never seen a Christmas tree before. My lights did not go out. Joe studied me silently. Suddenly, an announcer's voice came over the crowd noises. We interrupt this program, he announced flatly, for a special bulletin. A bridge laden with rush hour traffic has just collapsed at Gallipolis, Ohio. Further details as soon as they become available. I fell back on my chair. There was no bridge at Gallipolis, Ohio. The only bridge in that stretch of the river was the 700-foot Silver Bridge at Point Pleasant, the bridge I had crossed 1,000 times. They've done it again, I finally muttered softly. Those lousy bastards have done it again. They knew this was going to happen, and when. And they gave me all that bilge about a power failure. They knew, they just didn't want me to be able to warn anyone. They? Who's they, John? Joe asked gently. The phone rang. It was Dan. Did you hear? I heard. I guess that's what it was all about, Dan. That's what it was all about. Chapter 19, Where the Birds Gather. 13 months to the day, November 15th, 1966, to December 15th, 1967, The year of the Garuda came to an end. Like some evil specter of death, Mothman and the UFOs had focused national attention on a quiet little Point Pleasant and lured scores of reporters and investigators like myself to the Ohio River Valley. When the Silver Bridge died of old age, many of these same reporters returned once again to the village to revisit old friends and to share the pain of that tragic Christmas. Wherever you were, you watched the agonized aftermath on national television and read about Point Pleasant on the front pages of your local newspapers. The Silver Bridge was constructed in 1928 and was an engineering marvel in its day. It became an artery from West Virginia to Ohio, but had not been designed for the heavy traffic of the 1960s. Huge trucks lumbered across it continuously. People on both sides of the river crossed it daily to shop, to go to work, visit friends. The next nearest bridge was almost 50 miles upriver. On the Ohio side of the river, at the little cluster of shops and dwellings called Canoega, the stoplight at the mouth of the bridge was malfunctioning that afternoon. It was stuck on green, and the rush hour traffic along Route 7 was creeping past in confusion. Traffic was backing up in both directions, and at 5 p.m., the bridge was laden with slow-moving lines of cars and trucks in both directions. The light on the Point Pleasant side had always been recalcitrant, remaining red for so long that many regular bridge users had learned to ignore it. Running the light was a common practice. Frank Wamsley, a 28-year-old truck driver, was on his way home to Point Pleasant, riding in a gravel truck with a friend. They found the traffic backed up on the Ohio side. It was to be a black day for the Wamsley family. On the West Virginia side, Frank's cousin, Barbara, and her husband, Paul Heyman, were starting across the bridge in their 1955 Pontiac, and his uncle, Marvin Wamsley, was also on the bridge with two friends in a 1956 Ford convertible. Bill Needham, 27, of Asheboro, North Carolina, was muttering under his breath because he had been caught in the 5 o'clock rush hour. He inched his loaded tractor-trailer forward in a low gear. His partner, R.E. Toe, sat beside him in a patient silence. "The old bridge is sure bouncing around today," Howard Boggs, 24, commented to his wife, Marjorie, 19. She was holding their 18-month-old daughter, Christy. There were several small children on the bridge, riding with their Christmas shopping mothers. The bridge was shaking, but then it always shook, William Edmondson, 38, of King, North Carolina, said later. His partner, Harold Cundiff, was sound asleep in their tractor-trailer. The traffic jam worsened. The streams of cars and trucks ground to a halt. The old bridge shuddered and squirmed under the weight. Frank Wamsley spotted his cousin Barbara and her husband and waved to them. Just ahead, he saw Marvin and his two friends. Suddenly, the whole bridge convulsed. The time was 5:04 p.m. Steel screamed. The 700-foot suspension bridge twisted and the main span split from its moorings at either end. Electric cables strung across the bridge snapped in a blaze of sparks. 50 vehicles crashed into the black waters of the Ohio, tons of steel smashing down on top of them. It sounded like someone moving furniture upstairs, and then the lights went out, State Trooper R.E. Odell said. He was in an insurance office a block from the bridge. When the lights went out, I guess they really just flickered for a minute. I knew something was wrong. I thought maybe it was a wreck, so I ran outside. Mrs. Mary Heyer was in a drugstore on Main Street waiting for the traffic to ease so she could cross the bridge and pick up the daily notes from the Gallipolis Hospital. There was a sound like a jet plane or a plane going through the sound barrier, she said afterward. A rumbling roar that hurt your eardrums. Then the lights flickered. My first thought was that something had blown up. I thought, my God, John was right. Something is exploding. I ran outside and someone yelled, "The bridge went down." The bridge went down. A Christmas tree salesman in Canoega, H.L. Huambry, dropped the tree he was holding. The bridge just keeled over, starting slowly on the Ohio side, then following like a deck of cards to the West Virginia side. It was fantastic. There was a big flash and a puff of smoke when the last of the bridge caved in. I guess the power line snapped. I saw 3 or 4 people swimming in the water screaming. I couldn't do anything. I just stood there and watched. Then I saw a city ice and fuel boat come and pick them up. Frank Wamsley saw the bridge in front of him tilt sharply, and suddenly there was water all around him. I went all the way to the bottom with the truck. For a minute, I didn't think I was going to get out. Finally, I got out and came to the surface and caught hold of something and held on and was soon picked up. When a boat pulled alongside, he found he could not move his legs and had to be helped aboard. His back was fractured. Howard Boggs found himself on the bottom of the river outside his car. I don't know how I got out of the car or how I got to the surface, but all at once I was on top and caught hold of something like a big cotton ball. His wife and child didn't make it. Bill Needham's truck also sank to the bottom, but he somehow managed to force a window and reach the surface. You could see and hear people screaming for help, Mary Hyre described the scene. I saw a tractor trailer that floated a little before it sank, and a car and merchandise floating on the water. People on the West Virginia side of the river were so upset they could hardly realize what was going on. You could hear people saying, "This can't be true. You read about things like this in the paper, but it can't be happening here." Like Howard Boggs, William Edmondson suddenly found himself on the surface of the water, clinging to a truck seat. He had no idea how he'd escaped from his vehicle. His partner didn't surface. "When I got there, I could see this truck floating in the water," Trooper Odell explained. "There was a fella hanging out the side of it. Then they sank. I don't know if he got out." People came running from all directions, silent, ashen-faced, knowing their friends and relatives could be there in the icy water, now covered with debris and soggy, gaily wrapped Christmas packages. Boats of all kinds crisscrossed the river picking up survivors. On both sides of the river, people who had been waiting in lines to drive over the bridge were crying. Some had to be treated for shock. Night was closing in quickly. Boats with searchlights turned their beams onto the bridge and the surrounding water. A horrible silence fell over Point Pleasant. Sheriff Johnson's tall, spare figure stood on the water's edge. "Put out a general call for rescue units," he told a deputy softly, "and get everyone here. Block all the roads. Don't let anyone but rescue units into town." Mary Hyre pulled her coat around her pudgy frame and walked slowly to her office, tears running down her face, her years of experience overriding her emotions. She pushed open the door and walked to her phones. They were dead. She switched on the teletype machine and started to peck away with 2 fingers. At 5:04 p.m. this afternoon. Sirens wailed outside and the crowds grew. A girl was screaming hysterically in front of the office. "I almost got killed. I could have been on there. All those people dead. I could have been killed." Now, the other thing he goes over in his book here, which I'll go over in a moment, is the UFO activity immediately following the bridge collapse, which is also not reported on. And then there's another aspect of the case where supposedly some witnesses have said that they saw the Mothman on the bridge before it collapsed. Now, this might be one of those urban legends that kind of rose after time, because I couldn't nail down who said it when. It's just kind of a comment that said some people saw it right before it collapsed. So, yeah, we don't know what the deal is with that, but John Keel writes about a flashing red light type UFO. 2 miles north of the bridge, Mrs. Jackie Lilly was in a grocery store waiting for her teenage children. They were planning to go bowling in the alleys on the other side of the river that night. Her husband, Jim, was away working on his boat. At 5:20, Gary and Johnny Lilly rushed breathlessly into the store. "The bridge just fell in the river," Johnny declared. "That's not very funny," his mother replied. "It's true, the old bridge just collapsed," Gary said grimly, "and it was full of cars." Johnny, who was married, drove them home to their little house on Camp Conley Road. Mrs. Lilly headed for a phone. It was dead. As Johnny drove off, dashing back to Point Pleasant to be with his wife, Gary, 18, turned on the television set and searched for a news program. So it looks like the phone lines were dead, but the TV still worked. Okay. A few minutes later, Gary glanced out of the picture window in the living room and gasped. "There's something out there," he exclaimed. Mrs. Lilly looked out and saw a flashing red light disappearing over the trees. "Do you think those things are back?" Gary asked. "It was probably an airplane," she answered, but she turned off the lights in the living room so they could see better into the darkness outside. A few minutes later, a second light appeared, moving in the same direction as the first. It was one of those glaringly bright prismatic lights so familiar to the residents of Camp Conley Road. They went outside to watch it. "It wasn't an airplane," Mrs. Lilly assured me later. "It was one of those things, bobbing up and down like they do. There wasn't any sound." For the next hour, Mrs. Lilly, Gary, and daughter Linda divided their attention between the TV set and the eerie aerial activity outside. "We counted 12 of them," Mrs. Lilly reported. "Most of them were just above the treetops. They seemed to be coming down from up around the TNT area and moved south towards the town." The hundreds of people milling around the streets of Point Pleasant did not see anything in the skies that night, however. Perhaps the objects followed their old route, dipping into the ravine behind North Park and cutting eastward to the hills. "I was getting scared," Mrs. Lilly recalled. "We'd never seen so many of these things in one night. I kept trying the phone, wanting to get somebody to drive out and pick us up and take us out of there." Finally, around 9 p.m., she got a dial tone and was able to call to a neighbor who drove over, picked them up, and took them to the home of Mrs. Lilly's mother in Point Pleasant. A few months later, James Lilly moved his family away from Camp Conley Road. Good choice, perhaps. Around 2 a.m., I finally got a line through to Point Pleasant and was very much relieved when Mary Heyer picked up her phone. She spoke very slowly, obviously exhausted. "It's the most terrible thing I've ever seen," she told me. "But I was kind of prepared for it. You know those dreams I had?" "Well, it was exactly like that. The packages floating in the water. The people crying for help. Those dreams came true." "Is everyone all right?" I asked anxiously. "The McDaniels, Connie, the others." "I think so. It'll be a while before we know who was on the bridge. There could have been as many as 100 people. Some of them were rescued, but an awful lot of them are trapped under all that metal." After a month of brutally hard work, divers and rescue teams recovered 38 bodies. Several other people in Ohio and West Virginia were never heard from again, and it was assumed they also went down with the bridge. A number of UFO witnesses were among the dead. "I talked to one woman who lives right by the bridge," Mary continued. "She says that 2 days ago, she saw 2 men climbing the bridge." Climbing on it? Yes, they weren't walking across, they were climbing around the sides of it. Was she able to describe them? They were wearing checkered coats and black trousers. She couldn't see their faces too well because they were so far away, but she did notice their shoes. They weren't wearing boots, just ordinary shoes. She thought it was odd because of the weather we'd been having. "You'd better have the police talk with her, Mary," I said. "I will, there's just so much to do. People are coming from all over. And as soon as my phone was working again, I started getting calls from newspapers and radio stations all over the country. You'd better try to get some sleep." "I know, but I just can't leave the office now. Ambulances and rescue trucks are coming in from all over. They'll be working all night. I've got to be there." Later, the bridge was lifted from the water piece by piece and reconstructed in a field near Henderson. Engineers finally determined the collapse was due to metal fatigue and structural failure. "John," Mary began hesitantly, "do you think this had anything to do with UFOs and the bird?" "There's no answer to that, Mary. Maybe there were people on the bridge that could have told us something. I knew the condition of the bridge, and I'd have warnings about something terrible that was going to happen. If I could have put things together sooner, maybe we could have saved all those lives. It's not your fault. Some things are just meant to happen. You can't change the future, even when you know what is going to happen." Later on, he mentions this: "People ask me still if I know what the future holds, but just as I used Socratic irony in my investigations, I can only admit, like Socrates, that the more I learn, the less I know. My glimpses of the future were all secondhand and were frequently garbled by accident or design." and this is the end of the book here, all of the generations before ours were infested with false prophets, workers of wonders, and signs in the sky. In a sense, each generation is truly the last generation from their microscopic viewpoint. But our modern electronic communications and sophisticated press agentry have given present-day prophets tools the ancients lacked. Ideas, no matter how bizarre or fallacious, can span the world in a flash. And there are always people ready to rally to any banner, no matter how absurd. In recent years, we have seen a worldwide revival of interest in psychic phenomena and the supernatural. Stern, no-nonsense scientists now drag their beards to Loch Ness to search for the monster, while others comb the woods of the Northwest seeking the Sasquatch. And still others soberly discuss robots from outer space with Mississippi fishermen. But gradually, all these men are being drawn closer and closer to ontology, to an examination of the question that lies beyond the simplistic, can these things be? The real question is, why are there these things? After spending a lifetime in Egyptian tombs among the crumbling temples of India and the lamaseries of the Himalayas, endless nights in cemeteries, gravel pits, and hilltops everywhere, I have seen much, and my childish sense of wonder remains unshaken. But Charles Fort's question always haunts me. If there is a universal mind, must it be sane? So that's the general explanation for the premonitions. We have not only John Keel, who had his own premonitions of foreboding doom, and we will be covering even more wackiness and strangeness and just bizarre oddities that had to do with his telephones, strange phone calls that were going across the country that somehow related to UFO activity. There's so much more than meets the eye or the eyes of the Mothman in this bizarre case that does not seem to be confined to Point Pleasant, West Virginia. But we also had Mary Hyre with her own bad dreams where she saw floating presence in the river. And both of these things can be corroborated through original letters. And you can see these on johnkeel.com. And then, of course, the more rumor mill speculation of other citizens who had supposedly had premonitions and bad dreams about impending doom and disaster, which was just a certain vibe, an undercurrent throughout the daily activity in the Point Pleasant area. Very disturbing to say the least, but if we can confirm John Keel and Mary Hyre, then perhaps some of these other people with their premonitions or bad dreams of impending doom, perhaps they weren't lying. And they did have this, as well as, there's over 100 sightings of the Mothman. Even if most of them are hysterical, that still leaves quite a number that could have been legitimate. Same thing with UFO sightings, same thing with the Men in Black encounters. There's just a lot of craziness going on in this area. We will continue delving deep into this Mothman case. There is actually a lot more to cover. And this Mothman series, which is the most comprehensive on this cryptid creature and paranormal case, will keep going. If you like the podcast, feel free to donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. And make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. If you like the podcast, hit the like button. Feel free to share it across social media platforms. Any questions, comments, theories, leave them in the comment section. Like our Facebook page, and you could also check us out on Twitter, Reddit, and Patreon. And patrons do get a priority in case or topic requests. This is Bruce McGuire signing off.